Welcome to this episode of The People Dividend. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I am absolutely delighted to have in our virtual studio today, Adam Weber. And Adam, this is for you. Anyone who's in HR and human resources and people and culture, stay tuned for about the next 30 minutes because this will be absolutely a stay in your seat, stay on your walk, sit in your car kind of podcast because Adam Weber hosts the popular HR Superstars podcast. So I'm so lucky to have him on the People Dividend. And he's the former chief evangelist of 15Five, which is a continuous performance management company. Previously, he was the co-founder and chief people officer of Amplify, which was sold to 15Five in 2021, his former gig. And he has also co-founded Blue Bridge Digital, a SaaS mobile app development company where he grew and sold the company in 2016. He's the author of the Amazon bestseller, Lead Like a Human. In 2020, Adam was named one of the Business Insider's Rising Stars on the HR list. He holds a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's in organizational communication from Ball State University. A former musician. I want to explore that. I don't know how you become a former musician. Retired pastor, an avid pickleball player. He ought to live where I live in Palm Desert. Lots of pickleball players. He lives with his wife, 2 sons, and a dog, Poppy, in Zionsville, Indiana. So you can find out a lot more about Adam when you visit his website, adamweber.co. You'll find all of this in the show notes. So, Adam, welcome to the People Dividend.
Hey,
why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, well, that was so great. Thank you for the intro. I'm excited to spend time with you all. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have anything left to say. You got pickleball, you got the dog, and you covered my entire career. So I mean, I think we're pretty set.
Well, what was Amplify?
Yeah, Amplify was what we did was we created a way to measure cultures and measure kind of how employees were doing. And then we coached executive teams on how to kind of fix what was broken in their culture, how to build high performance, highly engaged teams by using science and data to kind of back up what motivates employees.
It's so interesting to use science and data to figure all of that stuff out. I'm curious about that in relationship to the title of your last book, Lead Like a Human. Say some things about that. What was the premise of Lead Like a Human? What is the premise? What are some of the key points? What do our HR listeners learn from that?
Yeah, and Lead Like a Human is very much still a concept that's alive for me in kind of the work that I do ongoing. It's this concept that you can lead as your true, authentic self, and you also can create cultures that are vibrant and alive, that really motivate and inspire the best out of people and drive performance, so that you can find this balance of high care, high performance, and then also going on the genuine leadership journey of when you yourself are a leader, how you show up, how you inspire people, how you create clarity, how you create safety for others. Those are the foundations that create cultures that are innovative, are motivative, that achieve great things, that people tell stories about for the rest of their career. And so, a lot of what my work is just trying to help other cultures create that inside of themselves.
Well, why do we have so many non-humans managing in companies then? Because I think we have a lot of really bad managers. In fact, we have an endemic of bad managers.
We do.
Why?
So, it's funny as you were talking about Amplify, like the data and what we learned from the data. And I would actually say there's 2 groups of people that are pretty historically bad. Like if I had to summarize 10 years worth of looking at millions of employee data points, there's basically 2 issues that came up constantly. One is a new manager got promoted into the role and they didn't have any discernible management skills. And they usually happens at scale and it wreaks havoc on a company. And then the other is that there's an asshole on the executive team who is also wreaking havoc on the culture, but the leadership team views them as too valuable to do anything courageous about it. And then
Boy, that's really telling. And I think it's a common experience that people have is this. I was a horrible first time manager.
You're
Oh my
right.
gosh, I've written extensively about being a micromanager and what that must have been like for the people who worked with me.
Oof.
It was bad. Yeah, hopefully, I improved. And I've, as a former HR executive. Um, Primarily working in research and R&D organizations with brilliant people, brilliant scientists, brilliant engineers. Um, I've seen a lot of folks, or I've worked with a lot of folks. I wouldn't call them jerks, but I call them as having very, poor EQ, very poor EI. No one as smart at the table as them. And I've had a good dose of that, and yet I find them some of the most creative people that to be around, and super smart people. But it's the data that led you to these conclusions about new man. When I think about this, Adam, here's what I want to say. Being a man, when you become a manager, it's sort of like becoming a parent. I mean, despite everything you can read and every course you can take, there really isn't any substitute for the experience. But what makes some people go on to be better managers than where they started? Hopefully it happens with parents too.
I'd like to think I'm better than I started, but here I am with two teenage boys. I'm doing my best.
Right.
I think that you said, like, why is it so hard even? And I think part of why it's hard and why there's so many bad managers is because when you kind of assume a leadership position, it naturally starts to expose a lot of undeveloped aspects of your own life. And the higher up you go inside the org, the more things get exposed. And that is a hard thing to face. And so you can face it only a couple ways. You can face it with the really abrasive personality, where you kind of just protect what you protect and you have everybody walk on eggshells. You can embrace it by being a micromanager, like not trusting other people. You can do it by not delegating. A very common first-time manager, what they do is like, they got promoted because they were the best person at the job. And so they immediately start doing everybody on their team's job until that was me too. And until they can't. And then that they can't moment is usually some sort of an outburst, something that, wasn't ideal. And then that creates friction and disconnect on the team as well.
Do you ever think we'll get out of this cycle? I mean, we have 45 years, 50 years of social science research that tells us just because you're technically expert or technically competent in your work, it doesn't make you a good leader. So we've got all this data that suggests that technical skills don't equate to leadership skills. How do we ever break the cycle of this bad management? What are some of the solutions?
Yeah, there's obviously like the technical skill ability, right? Which is like management, just like whatever job they came from is a learned skill. And so investing in the development of a person, how do you set priorities? How do you create clarity? How do you give feedback? Like those are all essential management skills. But there's this other kind of undercurrent, I will say, is that as you move up in your career and you face stress and pressure, the ability to manage your stress and the ability to kind of stay grounded in who you are, stay rooted in who you are as a person is one of the core things that separates great leaders from kind of that average leader that we're talking about. And my book talks about this. I call it centeredness. And it's like, what are the practices you put in place in your life that allow you to show up in a calm and steady way, that create consistent responses from your team, to help you face challenges with perspective? It's concepts like that I think really are the things that help separate some of the best leaders from the rest.
There is a lot of adversity in organizations. There's a lot of stress that comes with leading an organization. What do you think some of the ways, I mean, you call it centeredness. What are some of the behaviors that might be associated with that?
The most, so I'm always, I can tell you what's worked for me. and I'm always apprehensive to be too prescriptive, but I do think some of the things that have been kind of timelessly true are like gratitude. There's a lot of research behind that, but do you have like some version of a gratitude practice? A really simple one, if you're new to that concept, that works for me is like every walk I take the first 2 minutes and just kind of think through things that I'm grateful for. And it actually can change your brain chemistry. There's also things like journaling, self-reflection, reading something timelessly true, getting out in nature, taking care of your body, like reminding yourself that your body's just as important as your job, having good friends. All of those things kind of add up to this what makes a person whole. And what happens is when you have those they're disciplines, because when you have them in place, you never know when the most stressful moment of your career is coming. Like I didn't know the day before the office shut down that when I was leading a company, that was the last day I'd ever have an in-person office, and that we were going to have to take a cut 25% of our staff. I didn't know how that day was going, when that day was coming in my life, right? If you have those practices in place, you have access to a rooted version of who you are. And that can serve as a backbone and kind of a source of strength for you, as opposed to situation comes, it's now overwhelming to you. You're dictated by the situation. There's nothing outside of this. And you get really, we see this in HR all the time. Some pressing problem feels like the most important issue. It hijacks your strategy. It blocks your view, like your elevated view of how to make decisions. You lose your executive function, that sort of thing.
Boy, so true. I think about it. Sometimes I always feel that a lot of my coaching work bridges to the personal and to, the management of stress for very busy people. And I encourage people to take micro breaks, figure out what's the 10 seconds, what's the 30 seconds you can do to reframe a situation. Maybe to have a morning routine, something that becomes habitual. Maybe it's just movement, as you said, maybe getting outside, and a process of reflection. And I'm sure there are other tips. As you mentioned it, a lot of HR happens on interruption time. Despite your best laid plans or intentions, there's some employee relations crisis. There's some event that occurs which needs a response. That's what I often found as an HR leader was this interruption time, which dominated my day. And wonder if you could just say some more about that from your own experience and from coaching and advising HR executives.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most common story, right, that you hear right now, the research says 98% of HR leaders are dealing with some form of burnout, which is a number so astronomically high. But if you think about what's happening to the role, the responsibilities are dramatic. Like the fundamental nature of what HR is dramatically increasing. Like the actual what is asked of that role, and yet the staffing and the budget and even the autonomy to make decisions is not increasing. And so, like a timeless story that you hear is like, I just feel like I'm in reactive mode. I'm going from fire to fire to fire, and there's a couple things though. I mean, I think if you just want to like just maybe say like a kind of a hard truth, or a couple hard truths. One is that like HR leaders in general, not everybody's like this, but like there is a propensity to shoulder too much and to allow others to say no to them, but they don't say no themselves. So that's one. The other is they oftentimes allow the pressing now to supersede a well thought out strategy. And so I think by believing in like using data to inform the strategy that you create, and then genuinely believing in that strategy and the impact that it can have, growing in your no muscle. Those are a couple things I think that it's a hard job. There's no way. Like I don't want to act like there's some magical answer. It is progress though. You can change the reactive posture to a proactive posture in the role.
What do you think about this then in terms of, I'm going to use some old language here, seat at the table versus relative to HR? There are in some organizations, particularly small organizations, which make up the bulk of organizational life in the U.S., about what's expected out of HR, from being a coach to a CEO to managing social functions within the organization to managing health and welfare benefits. I mean, where does all that sit for HR leaders in small organizations versus large organizations? I don't know if you have any perspective on that, Adam.
Oh, well, it's not consistent. That's one perspective I have. I do, I think in a small organization, it's easy that it's really challenging because you have to do what the stuff that my expertise area, which would be like people operations, right? Culture activation, leadership development, enabling your managers. You also have to do the kind of tactical part of administrative HR, which is like compliance, benefits, payroll, CYA type of stuff as it relates to like employee disputes, that sort of thing. And so the one thing I'll say is that to really like unlock the people operations side when you're a one person HR team, your only path to doing that effectively as a one person team is by activating those managers. Like you basically have to gain buy-in from other people inside the organization to be your hands and feet. It may not be delegating on your team, but it's delegating amidst the culture is the way to kind of do that successfully.
In the past month, I've had 3 speaking engagements. One was for a SHURM event, Society for Human Resources Management. Another was for biopharma project and portfolio managers global conference. And the third was at an innovation institute run by a government. So it's all startup executives, very smart people, scientists, engineers, patent lawyers. And in each of them, I think there was a theme around AI and generative AI and what that means in terms of leading and managing humans and organizations. Have you given any thought to that, Adam, and in terms of data and research and practice?
I have given so much thought to it. I'm trying to figure out where to begin, and I've got a bunch of episodes with some AI like thought leaders as well that have been really really fascinating. Like at the base level, as it relates to HR, I would say the one opportunity is that this administrative aspect of HR should be eliminated. I think within like the vast majority of it should be eliminated within 2 years from right now. So that's like kind of the base level. The part that I am interested in is how AI has a chance to really adjust a lot of roles inside of companies, period. And so that makes me think that what's coming for HR or kind of modern strategic people operations is the evaluation of roles inside of an organization, the sunsetting of roles that no longer add value, the creation of roles that do add value, and then infrastructure that allows your current employees to move. So how do you train people to adjust and pivot? That's the current thing I'm fascinated by. And I'm actually thinking about that a lot is like, I think that the very best people leaders 5 years from now are going to be the ones that have the ability to and the courage to sunset existing jobs, create new jobs, and create infrastructures to allow people internally to move.
Yes, so interesting. It's, in the old world, we used to think about experience and credentials or credentials and experience in terms of climbing a corporate ladder. And certainly I think that, changed and is changing. It's really the ability to learn and to adjust and to pivot in these circumstances. It seems that in terms of generative AI at the extreme, companies have taken one of 2 approaches, which is either ban everything or 2, acknowledge it as a tool and figure out how to use it. Recently, someone told me that they were working on something, used some generative AI. Of course, it was blocked by the company's firewalls. And the manager, this person's boss, just said, well, do it on your phone and just cut and paste it and bring it on over as a way of doing things. But for certain repetitive tasks in human resources, I think even creating job descriptions, AI can be a wonderful tool in terms of being able to scan a lot of environment, and coming up with some stuff. Certainly seems to make a lot of sense, and is to continue thinking about the advancements in talent acquisition and what AI will do there, and to figure how do we advance this by making, one of the common complaints you hear from prospective employees is nobody ever got back to me or nobody ever talked with me. I mean, there's such a need for more chatbots in HR, which reduces the burden of a lot of these people running one-person HR shows or two-person HR shows.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think my hope with on the one-person HR shop is that tension of doing traditional HR versus people operations, that you'll have a lot more time for people operations, and that traditional HR that's more established and I think is more it's closer to being replaced by AI. And so I think it will hopefully unlock a lot of people operations people to do the work that they hoped to do when they originally got into HR.
It's interesting. In one of the organizations I worked, I think I started what was commonly referred to as one of the first workforce research and analytics teams, a people analytics team. I hired a couple of IO psychologists. They had the luxury of doing some primary research on issues that were important in this organization, as well as just doing millions of things with survey data and other criteria that were relevant to the employer. As you think about that, and as you think about workforce research and analytics, where do you think the future of that is? I mean, in terms of how AI might help us understand themes and patterns in data more readily or more easily, and with more accessibility to others. What do you think might happen?
Well, I feel like the thing you just said feels like that felt right to me. Like that it might be the part I'm thinking about now that's kind of fresh compared to what I was saying is like, could there be a use for AI also to be kind of like analyzing the large amounts of data and then even serving up recommendations for like capacity planning inside the org, that sort of thing?
I was always challenged as an HR leader and HR executive to get ahead of employee relations issues. I'm a big systems thinker, process thinker. Got a big career in executive development and executive development. And but when I was leading HR teams, I spent a lot of time in employee relations issues, either bad executives or problem situations that employees faced with bad managers or coworkers. And I always wonder, what I've been thinking about is how could I AI my way out of those situations?
Yeah.
Because in fact, it's one of the things that led me to leave my last organization. It was during the pandemic. My day was often full of lawyers, employees who were represented by counsel, and we were strategizing what we would do. And it was sort of just not fun.
Yeah. The part you also brought up of like how much you're just like responding to issues is that, so in my keynote I have a big slide that says 1/3 of an HR leader's time, 1/3 is spent responding to issues caused by managers, by poor management. Mm-hmm. So it's not an AI answer, but it's back to the manager. This is why why I believe heavily in like investing proactively. Like if you want to create a more proactive HR department versus a reactive department, this is where you start, is that you invest in front of manager issues, put the foundations in place so that you're not reacting to all of these issues.
True.
Yeah. Now, how you tie that to AI? Let's see. Let's think out loud here a little bit. How could we connect both of those two together?
Yeah, and now that 15.5 is behind you, and you grew that to a certain place, and you have AdamWeber.co in front of you, what does this mean for you and for everyone?
Well, I hope what it means for me. Let's see. To me, I hope that this is like the sustained chapter in my career where I'm really doing my highest and best work, and sitting with people and really creating sustainable change in their life. Just as you know, and I'm hopeful after we stop recording, I'll be able to ask you some questions about like launching an executive coaching practice and what it's like to truly sit with a person. But for the last 3 years, I've done this on the side and just like love the one-on-one experience and what can happen when a person is open-minded to grow. And also, I've been a co-founder, I've been a leader in high-stress venture-backed environments, and I understand. I understand innately that like it is an overwhelming position, and it's nice to have space to process and think and really to be intentional. And so I hope that I can provide that space for people, and that it's just a lot of people who get to tell stories of the impact that I've had on their lives. And I'm also, one thing I know about myself is that I love to speak too, though. And I love to make kind of macro. I love the moment of saying something that a whole room of people go, oh, something's different here. And so I'm hopeful that I can still impact the HR industry in some way too. And really like my work in HR, I think has really been kind of transitioning HR practitioners into HR executives, like a genuine executive on the executive team who's that critical voice in the CEO's ear, who's the person who's calling out where leaning into where conflict needs to be had, who's naming collaboration gaps on the team, and who's really like a foundational source of truth for the rest of the executive team. And so I'm hopeful. I guess if I could just, what I hope is that I'm on big stages and I'm in rooms full of people and kind of creating some movement and some change at the macro level while I'm simultaneously having these one-on-one deep interactions as well.
One of my mentors early in my career told me that I would know when I was making a transition into more people and culture leadership. She said when executives would stop asking you to do things and would say to you instead, "What do you think?"
Oh wow!
She said you will know you have made the shift at that moment in time when leaders in the organizations ask you what you think. I always found that to be very helpful and good guidance for developing HR talent. Is the ability to ask some good questions, the ability to always bring your best, to bring your A game. There are so many. Art Levinson, who was, I'd say, as close to founder as possible at Genentech, and who was chairman of the board at Apple, on the board of directors at Google, had an expression when I worked at Genentech and led all the Great Place to Work efforts for about 6 years. Always had an expression that A players hire A players, B players hire B players, and it all goes downhill from there. And I think there is some truth to that. I don't know if I would express it in the same way, but really getting people to bring their best requires leaders who are capable of knowing themselves and are able to get out of the way. Or maybe another way to say that, more diplomatic, more elegantly, is to give people the autonomy that they need and to acknowledge that they matter. And maybe that's some of the same concept that comes from Lead Like a Human.
It is very much. There's a chapter on this concept of continual improvement and how the best leaders are willing to openly display things that they're working on to improve. And part of high performance cultures is that companies are growing quickly, and humans don't grow naturally that quickly. And so one of the ways to kind of make progress on that is this like commitment to growth, commitment to learning and being willing to display it, being willing to show your kind of flaws and ask your team, hey, this is something I'm working on. If you see a pattern different than this, would you let me know? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it's such a critical skill, I think, for HR executives who often spend a lot of time in meetings during the day and who often have very good interpersonal skills. They know when to nod and listen and smile and do all those things appropriately, all the nonverbal skills appropriately. What I always counsel folks is that, you don't know what happened to the person who's in front of you 10 minutes ago. You don't know what's going to happen to them in 10 minutes after you end your meeting. So really try to work on being present. And I think that's tough as a manager as well, as this ability to really be present at a moment in time with someone. And any tips or suggestions you might have on being present?
You, I just more want to affirm the thing that you said that feels so true to me. Like just reminding yourself when you're leading people that everyone is going through something else. I call it the story behind the story. And when you start making quick assumptions, forgetting that like these are real people with real lives who have a real body, you don't know what's going on with that body, you don't know what's going on in their family, you don't know what's going on with their finances, and sometimes we just disconnect all those aspects of who people are, especially life has this funny way of sometimes your hardest moments outside of work correspond with the most stressful moment inside of work. And so kind of a generosity, it's fun, just like personally, tell a real story here. I was just thinking about this. I was telling you about that my last day of 15.5, I posted on LinkedIn, and it's like a lot of people are responding, and like everybody has this one view, right? And at the exact same time, 9:23 in the morning when my scheduled post went live, I'm sitting there at the doctor's office finding out that I had to have wrist surgery, and like it's not the biggest deal in the world. I'm not to make it, but to me it is, and to me it's it is just, you see these juxtapositions even in the high moments that you're being like, there's also a real life happening to you at the same time too. And I think if you bring that perspective that you hold, that empathy that you hold toward yourself, toward others, it creates a better leader.
Getting back to real life, why are you a former musician?
Oh yeah. Well, we'll put this in the show notes. You can put my amazing like long permed hair. But I was out of school, I was a professional, like I was a traveling musician. Like I was a songwriter. I still do write songs. It's just instead of like one a week, it's more like one a year right now. But that's actually a part of me. I'm hopeful in this next chapter with a little bit more space and time, that it's a hobby I can recultivate again too.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And, I think I always think about what's the best piece of advice or what's the best piece of guidance that I give to people in my coaching work. And I've thought long and hard about that. And it's to tell people to say hello. Then I think that's the best thing to create inclusion, to welcome others, is just the ability to say hello, to recognize someone as more than an element of your production, more than a cog in the machine. And, you've done such wonderful work with HR Superstars podcast, with your book, Lead Like a Human, with sort of gravitas that you have to your career. And just as we begin to wrap up, and everyone will find it in the show notes, adamweber.co. But if you were, it's the second half, or going to close in on the end of the year. If you were to offer people some guidance or some advice about bringing their best, about leading like a human, what would that be? I mean, what would that be?
Yeah. I think that pausing in the midst of stressful situations and adding intention is one thing that I think would help a lot. That you don't have to always react in the moment, but you can pause, reflect, I don't want to tell you what it is, but you know yourself. So find one thing that connects you back to who you are before you make a big decision. So I would say that. I would say make sure that you are genuinely cultivating learning that is outside of your job in some way. And just to kind of give you some perspective there, and maybe the other is just as we were saying about the people that you work with, just to pay attention when you are present with people. The benefit of that presence that you give them is that you see that spark inside of them, and what great leaders do is they see potential in others, and instead of trying to take it all for themselves, they figure out ways to unlock that potential in other people. And that is such a gift to give to another person, to sit with them, to see what they're great at, to help them see it themselves, and then to watch them thrive it's a really beautiful thing to do for someone else.
And that's exactly what we're going to be doing with Adam Weber. As you move into this new venture, this new part of your life, again, I encourage people to visit adamweber.co and see what Adam's up to as a speaker, as an author, as an expert in human resources and people and culture. Adam Weber, it's just been a delight to have you on the People Dividend today. And just want to thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your generosity.
Thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed that. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you again. And until the next episode of the People Dividend, stay well.